The sound a garbage bag makes when it's full of everything you own is a dull plastic sigh. It's the sound of surrender. It's the sound of a life that fits into something you'd normally throw away. I had two of them. My sister Willa had one plus her school backpack, which she refused to let out of her sight. That backpack held her sketchbooks. Her colored pencils, the only thing she'd ever owned that nobody could take from her. She clutched it against her chest like a shield. We stood on the cracked curb watching Sheila's minivan pull away, spitting a puff of blue smoke into the chilly October air. She didn't look back. Not once. Not even a glance in the rearview mirror. 2 years of our lives condensed into 3 black bags and a puff of exhaust. 2 years of trying to be small, of trying to be quiet, of trying not to be a problem. In the end, we were a problem anyway. The official reason was a change in family circumstances. That's what they always say. A change in family circumstances. Like we were weather patterns that had shifted unexpectedly. Like we were inconvenient clouds drifting across someone else's sunny day. The real reason was simpler, darker. Sheila had a new boyfriend named Curtis. He moved in 3 months ago, and I didn't like the way he looked at Willa. The way his eyes lingered a little too long when she walked past. The way he always seemed to be in the hallway when she came out of the bathroom. I told Sheila about it. I told her what I saw, what I felt in my gut. She chose Curtis. It was that simple. It was that complicated. The silence Sheila's departure left behind was heavier than the bags at my feet. It was a cold, indifferent silence that settled deep in my bones. October in Oregon doesn't play around. The wind cuts right through you, carrying the smell of damp leaves and distant rain. The kind of wind that gets under your skin and reminds you that you're alone. I was 17, 6 months shy of aging out of the system. In 6 months, I'd be legally nobody's problem. They'd hand me a check for a few $100s, shake my hand and send me into the world with nothing but good luck wishes and a folder full of papers. I'd seen it happen to other kids. Most of them ended up on the streets within a year. Willa was 15. She had 3 more years in the system. 3 more years of being shuffled from house to house, bed to bed, school to school. 3 more years of trying to be invisible enough to survive. But here's the thing about the foster care system. It doesn't like to keep siblings together. We're what they call a bonded sibling pair. That's the precise sterile language they use. Bonded sibling pair. Like we're a matched set of luggage that's too bulky to store. Like we're a problem to be managed until we weren't their problem anymore. Every placement we'd ever had, I fought to keep us together. Every social worker, every case review, every family meeting, I fought. Because Willa was all I had left in this world. She was my blood, my responsibility, the only person who remembered our mother's laugh, our father's hands, the way our house smelled like cinnamon on Sunday mornings before everything fell apart. I looked at her now, standing on that cold curb, her face pale as milk, her arms wrapped tight around her backpack. She was trying so hard not to cry. Her chin trembled with the effort. Her eyes were fixed on some middle distance, that place you go when reality becomes too much to look at directly. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but the words felt like lies in my mouth. How could it be okay? We were on a suburban street corner with nowhere to go. No money, no family, no one in this world who would miss us if we disappeared. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Mrs. Fairchild, our caseworker. On my way. Don't move. As if we had anywhere to move to. I shoved my hands in the pockets of my thin jacket. It was a hand-me-down from some church donation bin. Too big in the shoulders, too short in the sleeves. Nothing ever fit right when you were a foster kid. You learned to make do. You learned the clothes were just coverings, not expressions of who you were. Cars drove past their occupants, glancing at us for a second before looking away. We were a temporary eyesore, a brief, uncomfortable question in their otherwise smooth afternoon. Two teenagers with garbage bags on a nice residential street. Must be some kind of situation. Better not to get involved. I nudged one of the bags with my foot. It made that same sad sighing sound. Just clothes inside. Some books. A photograph of our parents that I kept wrapped in an old t-shirt so the glass wouldn't break. Everything else from our childhood was gone. Lost in the shuffle of 6 different placements over 8 years. 6 placements. 6 different bedrooms. 6 different sets of rules. 6 different families who promised we'd be safe, we'd be loved, we'd finally have a home. 6 different lies. After a while, you stop unpacking. You learn to live out of bags even when you have a dresser. You learn that home is just a word for the place you're staying for now. And family is the person standing next to you on the curb. The sky was the color of a dirty plate. Flat. Unforgiving. Gray that promised nothing but more cold. I thought about our parents. They'd been gone 8 years now. Car accident on a rainy night. One minute we had a family, a house, a future. The next minute we were orphans. Wards of the state. Numbers in a system that saw us as problems to be solved, not children to be loved. Willa finally let out a small sob, a sound she tried to smother in the collar of her jacket. I moved closer and put my arm around her. She leaned into me, her small frame shaking. "It's my fault," she whispered, her voice thick with tears she wouldn't let fall. "No," I said, my own voice rough. "No, it's not. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't my fault. It was the fault of a system that saw us as case files, as numbers on a spreadsheet, as a problem to be managed until we aged out, or got adopted, or simply vanished into the cracks. It was the fault of adults who made promises they had no intention of keeping. It was the fault of a world that looked at 2 kids who'd lost everything and saw only inconvenience. I held her tighter. The cheap fabric of our jackets rubbed together with a sound like static. For a moment, we were just 2 kids huddled against the wind. A tiny island in a sea of indifference. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if we'd be separated. That was the big fear. The one that lived in the back of my throat like a stone I couldn't swallow. The one that kept me awake at night, staring at unfamiliar ceilings in unfamiliar rooms. If they split us up, I'd lose the last piece of my family. I'd lose the only person in this world who knew my real name wasn't just a case number. But right then, in that moment, we were together. And that had to be enough. A familiar beat-up sedan turned the corner and pulled up beside us. Mrs. Fairchild's car. It was a tan Buick that had seen better days, the paint faded and scratched, one hubcap missing. She got out slowly, her face etched with a familiar weariness. Mrs. Fairchild was somewhere in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and glasses that always seemed to be sliding down her nose. She was a good person trapped in a bad system. I could see it in her eyes sometimes, when she thought no one was looking. The weight of all the children she couldn't save. The frustration of paperwork and budgets and never having enough resources for the kids who needed the most. She looked at us then at the bags, and her expression softened with something that looked dangerously like pity. I hated that look. I'd seen it too many times. Pity didn't keep you warm at night. Pity didn't put food in your stomach. Pity just made people feel better about not actually helping. Emmett. Willa. Her voice was low and careful. The voice of someone delivering bad news. Let's get your things in the car. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew. She was just here to clean up the mess. We loaded our pathetic bags into the trunk. Willa climbed into the back seat, pressing herself against the far door like she was trying to disappear. I sat beside her. The car smelled like stale coffee and paperwork. It was the official scent of our childhood. Every caseworker's car smelled the same. Every office, every courthouse, every government building. Coffee and paper and the faint desperation of people trying to hold a broken system together with string and hope. Mrs. Fairchild pulled away from the curb. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers counting out the seconds. Rain had started to fall thin and insistent, streaking the grime on the windows. Willa had her forehead pressed against the cool glass, watching the gray world slide by. When Mrs. Fairchild finally spoke, her words hit like stones. There are no emergency beds available. Not together. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could maybe find a spot for Willa in a group home north of the city, she continued, her eyes fixed on the road, and a bed for you at the youth shelter downtown. But that's the best I can do on short notice. The youth shelter. I knew what that was. A warehouse of last resorts. A place you went when you had fallen through every other crack. Gang kids and runaways and young men who'd already seen too much of the world's cruelty. And a group home for Willa surrounded by strangers without me there to watch out for her. We'd be separated, the one thing I had fought to prevent for years. No, the word came out harder than I intended. We're not separating. Mrs. Fairchild sighed, a long, tired sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. Emmett, you're 17. In 6 months, you're on your own anyway. The state's obligation to you is nearly met. My priority has to be Willa. I felt a hot flash of anger surge through me. She's my priority, too. She's my only priority. I know. Her voice softened. I know that. She took a turn heading away from the city toward the older, more forgotten highways. The landscape changed. Suburbs gave way to farmland to forest. The rain came down harder now, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. Which is why I'm taking a risk, she said. A big one. If my supervisor finds out what I'm about to do, I could lose my job. I sat up straighter. In the rearview mirror, her eyes met mine. serious, almost scared. I'm not supposed to tell you about this. Officially, this property was deemed unsuitable for minors years ago. It's been tied up in probate, forgotten by everyone who should have remembered it. But the estate finally cleared. It belongs to you now. Or technically, it belongs to the estate of Lorraine Ashford. Lorraine Ashford. The name hit me like a physical force. Our grandmother. Our mother's mother. A woman I knew only from a single faded photograph and half-remembered stories. She had died years ago, not long after our parents. We were told she wasn't able to take us in. That was all we knew. That was all we were ever told. What are you talking about? My voice was barely a whisper. Mrs. Fairchild gripped the steering wheel tighter. Your grandmother left her property to your mother. Since your mother is gone, it passes to you and Willa. It's a small plot of land with a cabin on it, out in the woods near a place called Oak Haven. No running water, and the electricity was shut off over a decade ago. A cabin. Willa spoke for the first time since we'd gotten in the car. Her voice was small, fragile, but there was something in it that hadn't been there on the curb. Something that might have been hope. Deep in the woods, Mrs. Fairchild confirmed. It's not much, Emmett. It's probably falling down. The property taxes haven't been paid in over 10 years. The county has a lien on it. A developer has been making offers, buying up all the land in that area for a new resort. They're scheduled to seize the property and auction it off. When? I asked. 90 days. 90 days, 3 months. That was all the time we had before we'd be right back where we started. Homeless. Separated. Lost. So we get a cabin for 90 days and then we're homeless again. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Maybe, she said. Or maybe you figure something out. She reached into her oversized bag on the seat beside her and pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed and heavy. She passed it back to me. This came to the office for you. From her lawyer, I think. It's been sitting in a file box ever since she died. Nobody knew what to do with it. I turned the envelope over in my hands. It felt impossibly heavy, like it contained the weight of a life I'd never known. Then she handed me a separate, smaller envelope. It was crisp and white. My name was written on it in her neat, hurried script. This isn't from the lawyer, she said. This is from me. I opened it. Inside was $200 in cash, mostly 20s and 50s. It's all I can spare, she said, her voice quiet. Don't tell anyone where you got it. It's for food for supplies. It won't last long. I stared at the money, then at the thick manila envelope in my lap. Through the window, the forest pressed close against the road, dark and ancient and full of secrets. There's something else you need to know, Mrs. Fairchild continued. The developer's offer to buy out the lien and take possession is on the table. It's not much. A few $1,000s, but it would be something. Enough for a deposit on an apartment for you, and it would show the state you have resources to contribute to Willa's care. It might keep her out of a group home for a while longer. The choice was laid out before me, stark and ugly. Take the quick money. Secure my own immediate future. Maybe buy Willa a little more time in a better foster placement. or go live in a dilapidated cabin with no water or power, with a 90-day eviction notice hanging over our heads, trying to build something out of nothing. It was an impossible choice. It was no choice at all. "We'll take the cabin." My voice was barely a whisper, but I'd never meant anything more in my life. Willa looked at me, her eyes wide, searching mine. I gave her a nod, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. For the first time in a long time, we had a choice that wasn't just which stranger's house to go to. This was ours. For 90 days, at least. It was ours. Mrs. Fairchild nodded slowly. "I figured you'd say that." She pulled over near a Greyhound station. The diesel fumes hung thick in the damp air. A few people milled around the entrance, hunched against the rain, cigarettes glowing in the gray afternoon. "There's a bus that leaves in an hour," she said. "It'll take you as far as Oak Haven. From there, it's a 3-mile walk. The address is on the deed." She turned to face me fully. Her professional mask was gone. What I saw underneath was just a tired woman who'd seen too many kids fall through the cracks. "Emmett, the system has failed you. I have failed you. I know that." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But this is a chance. It's a terrible long-shot chance. But it's the only one you've got to stay together." I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. "Don't screw it up," she said. We got out of the car. I took the money, the envelope, and our bags. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the cold was seeping into my bones. Mrs. Fairchild didn't say goodbye. She just watched us for a moment, her face a mask of professional concern and personal regret. Then she drove away, disappearing back into the system that had owned us for so long. We were finally on our own. The bus ride was 4 hours of rattling windows and the low hum of the engine. The seats were worn, the fabric scratchy, the air thick with the smell of diesel and old upholstery. We sat near the back, our bags piled on the seat next to us. Nobody else sat close. We were clearly runaways or throwaways, and the other passengers wanted no part of whatever trouble we might bring. Willa fell asleep within the first hour, her head resting on my shoulder, her breathing slow and even. For her, sleep was an escape. For me, it was a luxury I couldn't afford. Someone had to stay alert. Someone had to watch for danger. I stared out the window, watching the landscape transform. The dense grid of the city gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to tired-looking strip malls and gas stations. Soon those too disappeared, replaced by wide, empty fields lying fallow under the gray sky. The fields turned to rolling hills, and the hills grew steeper, more rugged, thick with trees whose leaves had turned to brilliant shades of rust and gold. It was beautiful in a wild, lonely sort of way, the kind of beauty that doesn't care if you live or die. The kind of beauty that was here long before humans, and would be here long after we were gone. I held the thick manila envelope in my hands, running my thumb over the crinkled paper. The return address was for a law office in a town I'd never heard of. It was addressed to me. Emmett Ashford. Seeing my real name connected to something so official felt strange. In the system, you're a first name and a last initial. You're a case number. You're defined by your file, not your family. This envelope felt like a piece of a different life, a life that had been stolen from us before we even knew it existed. I thought about my grandmother, Lorraine. The photograph was the only image I had of her. A woman with kind eyes and a stubborn set to her jaw, standing in front of a garden, her hands covered in dirt, a wide-brimmed hat on her head. She looked like someone who knew how to work, someone who didn't give up easily. My mom had kept that photo in her wallet. After she was gone, it was the one thing I made sure to grab from the wreckage of our old life. It was in my own wallet now, creased and worn from years of being carried. I didn't know my grandmother. We'd never met, not that I could remember. But I felt a connection to her, a pull toward this unknown place she had left for us, like she had been waiting for us to find our way back. The bus slowed its air brakes, hissing like a tired sigh, and pulled into a gravel lot in front of a single building that served as the post office, general store, and bus station for the town of Oak Haven. The sign was faded, the paint peeling. Population 412. We were the only ones who got off. The bus pulled away, leaving us in a profound silence. No traffic noise, no sirens, no shouting neighbors or blaring televisions. Just the cawing of a distant crow and the whisper of wind through the pine trees that surrounded us on all sides. The air here was different. Crisp and clean smelling of pine and wet earth and something else. Something ancient. It filled my lungs and made me feel strangely alert, like I'd been breathing stale air my whole life, and only now understood what real oxygen tasted like. Oak Haven wasn't so much a town as a crossroads. There was the general store with its weathered wooden porch, a boarded-up gas station that looked like it hadn't pumped fuel in 20 years, a handful of houses scattered among the trees, their windows glowing faintly in the gathering dusk. A woman stood on the porch of the store watching us with open curiosity. She had silver hair pulled back in a braid and sharp eyes that took in every detail. We were clearly not from around here. Two teenagers with garbage bags and hollow eyes stepping off a bus from nowhere and heading into the woods. "Now what?" Willa asked, pulling her jacket tighter. She looked small and out of place against the vast backdrop of the forest. The trees here were enormous, towering Douglas firs and western red cedars that had been growing since before this country existed. I pulled out the deed from the envelope. The paper was thick and yellowed with age, covered in legal language I barely understood. But there was a handwritten map on the back, crude. Just a few lines sketched in pencil. A road marked with an X, a creek, a cabin. "Now we walk," I said. We shouldered our bags. Mine felt heavier now, weighted with everything we didn't know. We stopped in the store first, using $20 of Mrs. Fairchild's money to buy 2 bottles of water, a loaf of bread, some peanut butter, and a box of matches. The woman behind the counter had those same sharp, bird-like eyes. Her name tag said Opal. She looked at our meager supplies, our worn-out clothes, our faces that were trying too hard to look like we knew what we were doing. "You the Ashford kids?" she asked. I nodded, surprised that anyone here knew our name. "Thought so. You look like her, your grandmother." She slid our supplies into a paper bag. She was a good woman, kept to herself, but a good woman. Shame what happened. I wanted to ask what happened. I wanted to ask everything, but the words wouldn't come. We were too tired, too raw, too uncertain of our place in this strange world we'd stumbled into. Opal seemed to understand. The cabin's about 3 miles down Old Mill Road. Keep to the left when the road forks. You'll see a rusted mailbox with the name barely visible. Path goes into the woods from there. Thank you, Willa said. Her voice was small but genuine. Opal's expression softened for just a moment. You kids be careful. Woods can be dangerous after dark, and the nights come early this time of year. We thanked her again and headed out. The walk was long. The paved road quickly turned to gravel, and the gravel eventually dissolved into a packed earth track, barely wide enough for a single car. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out what little light the gray sky offered. The woods were alive with sounds we weren't used to. The rustle of unseen animals in the undergrowth, the creak and groan of tree limbs in the wind, the steady drip of water from leaf to leaf. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered against a trunk. The rhythm of it was almost musical. It was intimidating, but it was also strangely peaceful. After years of living with the constant noise of other people, the TVs blaring the arguments through thin walls, the slamming doors and midnight sirens, the quiet of the forest was a relief. Here there was only nature, only the sound of our own footsteps and our own breathing. We walked for what felt like hours following the crude map. Twice I was sure we were lost. The trail would seem to disappear, or we'd come to a fork that wasn't marked on the paper. But then we'd see a landmark from the sketch. A strangely shaped oak tree with branches that reached out like grasping fingers. A tumbled-down stone wall half buried in moss. Each marker felt like a small miracle, a breadcrumb left behind by someone who wanted us to find our way. Finally, as the last light of day was fading to purple, we saw it. A rusted mailbox half hidden by overgrown bushes. The name Ashford was barely visible beneath the rust painted in letters that had once been white. A narrow path led from the mailbox deeper into the woods. This is it, I said. My voice sounded strange in the quiet. Willa looked down the path. Her expression was unreadable. It's dark. She was right. The path was more like a tunnel enclosed by dense thickets of rhododendron and laurel. The bushes pressed close, their leaves wet and gleaming in the dim light. I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The battery was at 12%. We'd have to be quick. We pushed our way through. Wet leaves brushed against our faces, cold and clammy. Branches snagged our clothes, tugged at our bags. The path twisted and turned, and with each step I felt like we were moving further away from the world we knew, and deeper into something else entirely. And then the woods opened up. We stepped into a small clearing, and there it was. The cabin. Mrs. Fairchild was right. It wasn't much. It was small, made of dark, weathered logs that had silvered with age and exposure. The porch sagged in the middle, and the stone chimney listed slightly to one side, as if it was tired of standing up straight. The windows were dark and empty, like vacant eyes staring at nothing. A huge pine tree had fallen near it. At some point, its trunk narrowly missing the roof by what looked like inches. The tree had been there long enough that moss had grown over it, transforming it into a green wall alongside the cabin. The place looked more than just abandoned. It looked forgotten. It looked like it had been swallowed by the forest and was only now being spit back out. But it was still standing. The roof hadn't caved in. The walls were straight. The door was solid. It had survived. I felt a strange sense of pride looking at it. This wreck, this forgotten piece of the world. It had survived 15 years of neglect, of storms of the forest, trying to reclaim it. And it was still here. It was ours. I walked up the creaking steps of the porch. The wood groaned under my weight, but held firm. Willa was close behind me, her hand gripping the back of my jacket like she was afraid I might disappear. In the envelope, there was a single old-fashioned iron key, heavy and cold in my palm. The kind of key that belonged to another era when things were built to last. I put it in the lock. It was stiff, and I had to jiggle it, working it back and forth while the rust complained. But then I heard a loud, satisfying clunk as the bolt slid back. The sound of something unlocking, the sound of possibility. I pushed the door open. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, thick with the scent of dust and damp wood and time. It was the smell of a place that had been holding its breath for years. We stepped inside. I propped the door open to let in what little light remained from the dying day. The cabin was a single room. A thick layer of dust covered everything, softening the edges of the furniture and turning the whole space into a monochrome landscape of gray and shadow. Cobwebs hung in the corners like ghostly curtains. On one side there was a small kitchenette with a cast-iron wood stove for heat and cooking. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the middle of the room, coated in dust. On the other side, a stone fireplace dominated the wall, its hearth cold and dark. A built-in bunk bed was tucked into an alcove, the mattresses bare but intact. It was like a time capsule. A jar of what might have once been flour sat on the counter. A pair of worn boots stood by the door as if their owner had just stepped out for a moment and intended to be right back. A coffee cup sat on the table, a ring of dried residue at the bottom. It was clear no one had lived here for at least 15 years. But it felt like someone could walk in at any moment, like the cabin was just waiting for its owner to return. We dropped our bags. The sound was muffled by the dusty floorboards. Willa walked slowly around the room, trailing her fingers through the dust on the tabletop, leaving a clean streak in her wake. "It's so quiet," she whispered. I knew what she meant. It was a deep, profound quiet, the kind you could feel in your chest. No neighbors arguing, no traffic rumbling past, no televisions or radios or phones ringing. Just the sound of our own breathing and the wind sighing in the pines outside. It was unnerving. It was also the most peaceful thing I'd ever experienced. While Willa explored the main room, I started looking for necessities. The hand pump at the kitchen sink was rusted solid. No matter how hard I worked, the handle, nothing came out. No water. That was problem number 1. I went back outside, my eyes scanning the property. The clearing was small, maybe an acre, and all hemmed in on all sides by the dense, towering forest. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of pine needles and fallen leaves. Everything was wet and cold and silent. As I walked the perimeter, my phone's flashlight cutting weak arcs through the growing darkness, I noticed something odd. Behind the cabin, almost completely obscured by a thicket of thorny bushes and young saplings, was a shape that didn't belong. It was a long, straight line, something dark against the chaotic tangle of the woods. Nature doesn't do straight lines. Nature curves and twists and follows the path of least resistance. But this line was precise, deliberate. Curiosity pulled me forward. I pushed my way through the scratchy branches, my jacket snagging on thorns. The bushes were thick, forming a natural wall. It was almost like they'd been planted there intentionally to hide whatever lay beyond. It took me several minutes of wrestling with the underbrush. My hands getting scratched, my clothes getting soaked from the wet leaves. But finally I broke through into another smaller clearing. And I stopped dead. It was a greenhouse, but not just any greenhouse. It was enormous. At least 100 feet long, with a high peaked roof that reached up toward the darkening sky. The frame was made of dark, weathered steel, thick and sturdy, built to last. And the walls were glass. Hundreds of panes of glass, miraculously mostly intact, though covered in a thick layer of green moss and grime. It was an incredible structure, cathedral-like in its proportions, completely out of place in the middle of nowhere, like stumbling upon a lost temple in the jungle. It was completely overgrown. Vines snaked up the metal frame, their leaves gone brown with autumn. Trees had grown up right against the glass walls, their branches scraping against the panes. Nature had been slowly, methodically trying to reclaim it for years, but it had failed. The greenhouse stood, defiant, waiting. I walked its length, my boots crunching on the fallen leaves. The scale of it was hard to comprehend. Why would someone build something like this out here? How had they built it? The logistics alone seemed impossible. The nearest town was miles away, and this was clearly professional construction. Industrial-grade steel and glass, not some hobbyist's garden project. At one end, a single glass door was blocked by a fallen tree limb. I climbed over it, my muscles protesting the effort after the long walk. The handle was rusted, but it turned with a groan of protest. The door swung inward. The air inside was different, warmer than outside even after all these years. Humid, rich with the smell of damp earth and decaying plants. It was the smell of life even in a state of neglect. The interior was a chaotic jungle. Long, empty planting beds ran the length of the structure, filled with the dead, skeletal remains of plants. Weeds grew everywhere, some of them as tall as I was. But underneath the chaos, I could see the bones of the place. It was professionally built. Irrigation pipes ran along the ceiling. Trellises stood ready for climbing plants. Ventilation systems, now rusted and choked with vines, lined the upper walls. This wasn't a hobby garden. This was a serious operation. In the center of the greenhouse, there was a potting station, a long, sturdy wooden bench. On it sat clay pots, rusted tools, and empty seed packets. Their bright colors faded to pastel ghosts. Another time capsule. Just like the cabin. This was my grandmother's world. This was her life's work. At the far end of the bench, half hidden under a pile of burlap sacks, was a large, heavy-duty tool chest. It was made of steel painted a dark green that had held up better than anything else in this place, and it was locked with a heavy padlock. I tugged on it, but it was solid, industrial. Whatever was inside my grandmother hadn't wanted it found by just anyone. What would be in a locked chest in a hidden, abandoned greenhouse? My mind raced with possibilities. Money, valuables, something she had hidden away for safekeeping. Or maybe just tools and supplies locked up to protect them from the elements. I looked around the silent, derelict space. The dying light filtered through the grimy glass, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. This was more than just a hobbyist's garden. The sheer size of it, the quality of the construction, the professional irrigation systems. This was something bigger. A mystery wrapped in glass and steel and years of silence. I went back to the cabin, my mind buzzing with questions. Willa had found a broom and was sweeping a small patch of the floor, a cloud of dust billowing around her. Her face was smudged with dirt, but there was a small smile on her lips, the first real smile I'd seen from her in days. "You won't believe what I found," I said, still trying to process it myself. When I told her about the greenhouse, her eyes lit up. We went back together and I showed her. Pushing through the bushes, stepping into that hidden clearing, watching her face transform as she took in the massive glass structure. She was as stunned as I was. Who builds something like this? She breathed, staring up at the high glass ceiling. "Grandma did," I said. The words felt right. This place had her name written all over it. The stubborn set of her jaw in that photograph. The way she stood in front of her garden like it was her kingdom. She wasn't just some old woman puttering around with flower pots. She had vision. She had determination. She had built something magnificent in the middle of nowhere, and then she had kept it secret from everyone, including us. We went back to the cabin as darkness fell completely. The stars were coming out, more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. In the city, you forget that the sky has depth. But out here, away from all the light pollution, the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of diamonds. I took out the thick manila envelope again. I had been so focused on the deed and the map that I'd barely looked at the rest of its contents. I emptied it onto the dusty table. There was the deed, a sheath of legal papers related to the estate full of language I couldn't fully understand. Tax documents showing years of unpaid bills. Letters from the developer making increasingly aggressive offers. And at the very bottom, a small tarnished silver key taped to a piece of cardboard. On the cardboard, in faded handwriting, were 2 words: "For the chest." My heart started hammering. I looked at Willa. Her eyes were fixed on the key. She understood. Without a word, we both knew what we had to do. We grabbed the flashlight and headed back out into the night. Back to the greenhouse. Back to the locked steel box that held. I was certain the answers to everything. The beam of the flashlight cut a nervous, bouncing path through the gloom of the greenhouse. The air was thick and cool now, and the skeletal remains of the dead plants cast long, dancing shadows on the grimy glass walls. It felt like we were intruders in a sacred sleeping place. We reached the potting bench, and I focused the light on the dark green tool chest. The padlock looked ancient and formidable, the kind built to last generations. I took the small silver key from my pocket. My hand was shaking as I inserted it into the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it, and with a click that sounded deafeningly loud in the silence, the lock sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid of the chest. My first feeling was a wave of disappointment. There was no treasure, no stacks of cash, no gold bars, no secret documents that would solve all our problems. The chest was filled with papers. It was packed to the brim with notebooks, binders, and stacks of letters tied with twine. Years of writing, years of thoughts, a lifetime of words. On top of the pile was a single thick envelope. It was made of heavy cream-colored paper, the kind you'd use for wedding invitations or important announcements. And written on the front in elegant fading ink was a single phrase. For my grandchildren, Emmett and Willa. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was from her. A message from beyond the grave, waiting all these years for us to find it. I carefully lifted the envelope out. It was unsealed. I looked at Willa, who was watching me with wide, expectant eyes. She looked younger suddenly, vulnerable, like the scared little girl she tried so hard not to be. I sat down on an overturned bucket. She sat on the edge of the potting bench beside me. I angled the flashlight so we could both see, and I began to read aloud. My dearest Emmett and Willa. The letter began. If you are reading this, it means that I am gone, and that somehow against all odds you have found your way back here. It means that the world has not been as kind to you as I would have wished. For that, I am more sorry than words can ever say. I have written you 1,000 letters in my mind. Letters full of love and anger and regret. This will have to be the one that holds them all. I know you have been told that I did not want you, or that I was unable to care for you after your mother passed away. That is the story they wanted you to hear. It is the easiest story. It is also a lie. I had to stop reading. My voice was shaking too badly to continue. Willa reached over and put her hand on my arm. Her touch was warm, real. I took a breath and kept going. When you were taken into the system, I fought for you. I fought with everything I had. I went to every meeting. I filled out every form. I called every office. I hired a lawyer I couldn't afford. I did everything a person could possibly do. But the system had already made up its mind about me. You see, when I was young, much younger than you are now, I made a mistake. I was with the wrong people in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I ended up with a criminal record. For possession. It was a minor charge. A youthful mistake that I spent the rest of my life making up for. But for the state, that single piece of paper defined me. They saw me as an unfit guardian, a poor elderly woman with a criminal past, living in a dilapidated cabin in the woods. They would not give you to me. They told me to give up. They told me it was a lost cause. I felt hot tears sliding down my cheeks. All these years of believing we were abandoned, that nobody wanted us, that we were disposable children not worth fighting for. And she had fought. She had fought and lost, and we never knew. But I am not a person who gives up. The letter continued. So I made a choice. If I could not give you a home with me, I would build a home for you to come back to. This place, this land, this greenhouse, this was all for you. Your grandfather and I built this cabin with our own hands back when we were young and foolish and in love. And after he was gone, I built the greenhouse. People in town thought I was crazy. The old woman in the woods talking to her plants. But this was my rebellion. This was my fight. I could not fight their system of paper and rules. So I fought with dirt and water and seeds. I poured every penny I had and every ounce of my strength into this place. It became my whole world because I was building it for my whole world. You. I am a botanist, a self-taught one, but a good one. In this greenhouse, I gathered and cultivated rare and forgotten things. Heirloom vegetables, medicinal herbs, flowers that most people have never even heard of. Things of value not just for their beauty, but for their resilience, for their history. Things that, like you, deserved a second chance. My plan was simple and perhaps foolish. I would make this place profitable. I would show the world and the system that I was not just some poor old woman. I would have an income. I would have stability. I would save and save until I could hire a real lawyer, a good one who could beat them at their own game and bring you home. But my body betrayed me before my spirit could. My heart, it seems, was not as stubborn as my will. I had to stop reading again. My vision was blurry. I realized I was crying. Silent tears tracking paths through the dust on my cheeks. I looked over at Willa. She was openly weeping, her shoulders shaking. The story we had been told our whole lives, that we were abandoned, that no one in our family wanted us, that we were alone in this world. All of it was a lie. We were not abandoned. We were fought for. We were loved, fiercely and secretly by a woman we never got to meet. I took a shaky breath, wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, and continued reading. I am running out of time, my darlings. I can feel it. So I am leaving you not the victory I had hoped for, but the tools for your own. The world is a hard place, and it will try to take everything from you. It will try to tell you that this land is worthless, that you should sell it for a quick and easy dollar. Do not listen. The developer who wants this land wants to pave it over. They see trees and they see timber. They see a stream and they see a drainage problem. They do not see the life that is here. They do not see its value. In the floor of this greenhouse under the main potting bench, there is a loose floor panel. Beneath it, you will find my real legacy. It is not money, though there is some. It is something far more precious. It is my life's work. A seed bank containing all the varieties I have collected over 30 years. Cherokee purple tomatoes, moon and stars watermelons, dragon's tongue beans, flowers and herbs and vegetables that corporations have tried to patent and control, seeds that have been passed down through generations of farmers and gardeners, seeds that carry history in their DNA. It is also my journals detailing how to grow them, who to sell them to, what their stories are. And yes, there is some cash, all that I managed to save. It is not enough to solve your problems, but it is enough to start. It is seed money. in every sense of the word. The choice now is yours. You can take the developer's money. I will not blame you if you do. It is the safe path, the easy path. It will give you a roof over your head for a time. Or you can stay. You can fight. You can take up my work. You can bring this place back to life. It will be hard. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done. You will be cold and hungry and tired. You will doubt yourselves. You will want to give up. But you will be together. And you will be building something that is truly yours. Whatever you choose, know this: I love you. I have loved you every single day since you were born. Every seed I planted was a prayer for you. Every flower that bloomed was a message I hoped you would one day see. You are not unwanted. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. You are the harvest of my heart. Your grandmother, Lorraine. The letter ended there. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of our grief. I cried for the grandmother I never knew. I cried for the years we had lost. I cried for the lies we had been told and the hard truth we had just been given. And I cried for the love, so powerful and so patient, that it had been waiting for us here in the dark, in a forgotten greenhouse, in the middle of the woods. Willa was sobbing openly now, her whole body shaking. I put my arms around her and held her tight. We stayed like that for a long time, two orphans clinging to each other in the ruins of a dream. We were only now beginning to understand. This place wasn't an inheritance of property. It was an inheritance of purpose. It was a challenge, a choice. It was a second chance. When we finally stopped crying, I looked around the greenhouse with new eyes. It wasn't a ruin anymore. It was a cathedral. A temple to the stubbornness of one woman who refused to let the system have the last word. I stood up, my legs stiff from the cold. "Let's find it," I said. Willa looked up at me, her face blotchy and tear-stained. But there was something else in her expression now, something that hadn't been there before. A spark. I pointed the flashlight beam under the main potting bench, a long, heavy table built from thick planks of wood. It was cluttered with old pots, bags of soil, and rusted tools. We started clearing it, our movements slow and deliberate at first, then more urgent. We moved the heavy bags, coughing as dust filled the air. We stacked the clay pots. Finally, the space underneath was clear. The floor was made of wide wooden planks, dark with age and moisture. I ran the flashlight beam over them, looking for any sign of a seam, a handle, anything out of the ordinary. "There," Willa whispered, pointing. At the very back, almost hidden against the foundation wall, was a single plank that was just a fraction of an inch shorter than the others. There was a small drilled hole at one end, just big enough to fit a finger into. I knelt down, the cold seeping through my jeans. I hooked my finger into the hole and pulled. The plank didn't budge. It was swollen with damp and wedged tight. "Here, let me try," Willa said. She knelt beside me and we both hooked our fingers in, pulling together. With a loud groan of protesting wood, the plank lifted. Beneath it was not a hollow space, but the lid of another box. A metal box set flush into the ground. It had a simple latch. I flipped it open and lifted the lid. Lorraine had been telling the truth. The compartment was lined with tin and was perfectly dry. And it was full. On top was a stack of cash bound with a rubber band. I lifted it out. Mostly 20s and 50s. I didn't count it then, but it felt substantial. More money than I had ever held in my life. Beneath the cash were the real treasures. There were a dozen thick, leather-bound journals, their pages filled with that same elegant script. Drawings of plants, notes on soil composition, records of sales and contacts. A lifetime of knowledge preserved on paper. And then there were the seeds. They were stored in hundreds of small, meticulously labeled glass vials and foil packets, all organized in wooden trays. Each label had a name and a series of numbers and notes. Moon and Stars watermelon, Cherokee purple tomato, Dragon's tongue bean, Scarlet runner, Glass gem corn, Lemon cucumber. It was a library of life, a bank of possibility. I picked up one of the journals and opened it. The page was a mix of scientific observation and personal reflection. There was a detailed drawing of a tomato plant with notes on its preferred soil acidity and watering schedule. And beside it a handwritten note, your mother's favorite. She loved to eat them straight from the vine, warm from the sun. I grow them every year in her memory. I felt a fresh wave of emotion wash over me. This wasn't just a collection of plants. It was a collection of memories. It was a family history told through seeds. It was our grandmother's love preserved in glass vials and paper packets, waiting all these years for us to find it. I closed the journal and looked at Willa. Her eyes were wide, taking in the scale of what we'd discovered. "What are we going to do?" she asked. Her voice was small, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. The easy path, or the hard one, the money from the developer, or the legacy from our grandmother. I thought about everything we'd been through. Every foster home, every broken promise, every adult who told us they would take care of us and then threw us away when we became inconvenient. The system expected us to fail. The developer expected us to sell. Everyone expected us to take the easy way out. Maybe it was time we did something no one expected. "We stay," I said. The words came out with a certainty that surprised even me. "We stay and we fight." A slow smile spread across Willa's face. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks, maybe months. "Okay," she said. "We stay." We put the money and the journals in my backpack and replaced the floor panel. We walked back to the cabin together, side by side in the dark. The stars were blazing overhead, more stars than I'd ever seen. The cabin didn't look so dilapidated anymore. It looked like a fortress, like a beginning. That night we built a fire in the old stone hearth. It took several tries. The flue was partially blocked, and at first the cabin filled with smoke. But eventually, we got it working. The flames caught and grew, casting warm, dancing light across the dusty room. We ate peanut butter sandwiches and drank bottled water and watched the fire burn. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of running. I dreamed of planting. And in the morning, we would begin. The first weeks were the hardest of my life. We were pioneers in our own backyard, battling against a decade and a half of neglect, with nothing but our bare hands and the stubborn refusal to give up. Our days were governed by the sun and our nights by the cold. The $200 from Mrs. Fairchild combined with the cash our grandmother had left, just over $3,000, felt like a fortune. But we knew it had to last. Our first priority was survival. The hand pump at the cabin was completely rusted through. No matter how I worked the handle, nothing came out but a dry scraping sound that set my teeth on edge. But Lorraine's journals mentioned a spring-fed well near the greenhouse, fed by an underground stream that had been flowing for centuries. We found it on our third day. It was hidden beneath a wooden cover that had rotted through in places, surrounded by ferns and moss. The water was ice-cold and crystal clear. I cupped my hands and drank, and it was the best water I had ever tasted. Clean and pure, with a mineral sweetness that city water could never match. We cleared the debris, reinforced the cover with boards salvaged from a collapsed shed behind the cabin, and rigged up a simple bucket system. Every morning and evening we made the trip to the well, hauling water back to the cabin in whatever containers we could find. It was hard work, but it was honest work. The kind of work that makes you feel alive. The cabin itself was a constant project. We swept out mountains of dust, filling the air with clouds of gray that made us cough and sneeze for hours. We scrubbed the floors on our hands and knees with rags torn from old clothes we found in a trunk. We patched a leak in the roof with a piece of tin we scavenged from the collapsed shed, hammering it into place with a rock when we couldn't find a proper hammer. The wood stove was our greatest challenge and our greatest victory. For the first 3 days, every time we tried to light a fire, the cabin filled with thick, choking smoke. We'd have to throw open the door and windows, gasping for fresh air, while our eyes streamed with tears. I thought there was something wrong with the stove itself. I was ready to give up on it entirely. But Willa found the answer in one of Lorraine's journals. A simple note in the margins. Remember to open the flue damper before lighting. The handle sticks. The flue. Of course. There was a small lever on the chimney pipe that controlled the airflow. It was rusted nearly shut, but with some work and a lot of penetrating oil we found in the greenhouse, we got it moving again. The first night we had a real fire. We sat in front of it for hours, mesmerized by the flames. The warmth seeped into our bones, driving out the cold that had been our constant companion. It felt like a monumental victory. We had made fire. We had created warmth. We were surviving. Our diet was simple. Peanut butter sandwiches, canned soup heated on the wood stove, crackers and cheese when we could afford it. Once a week we made the long walk to Oak Haven, 6 miles round trip, carrying our supplies in our backpacks. The journey took most of the day, but we learned to make it efficiently, leaving at first light and returning before dark. Opal at the general store slowly warmed to us. Her sharp eyes softened with a grudging respect when she saw us week after week, buying practical things like work gloves, lamp oil, and bags of rice instead of junk food and soda. She started setting aside day-old bread for us at a discount, wrapping it in brown paper and sliding it across the counter without a word. It was a small gesture, but it felt huge. It felt like we were being seen, like we were no longer just 2 stray kids passing through, but members of something larger, a community, however small. But our real work was in the greenhouse. The scale of the restoration was overwhelming. Standing at one end, looking down the 100-foot length of the structure, it seemed impossible. There was so much death in there, so many years of neglect to undo. We started with the dead plants and weeds, hauling them out by the armful, until our muscles ached and our hands were raw. Day after day, we filled garbage bags with dried vines and rotted leaves, and the skeletal remains of plants that had once been lovingly tended. We piled them behind the greenhouse, creating a compost heap that would eventually give back to the soil. Then we tackled the glass. Each pane was covered in a thick layer of moss and grime that blocked out the light. We made a cleaning solution from water vinegar and a little dish soap, and we scrubbed every single pane by hand. It took weeks. We worked from ladders we found in the shed, reaching up to clean the higher sections while the cold October wind whipped around us. But as each pane of glass was cleaned, more and more light poured into the space. It was like watching the greenhouse wake up from a long sleep. The interior transformed from a shadowy, oppressive cave into something beautiful, something alive with possibility. The light revealed what we couldn't see before: the craftsmanship of the structure, the elegant curves of the steel frame, the ingenious design of the irrigation system with its network of pipes and valves that could deliver water to every corner of the space. With the light came a new appreciation for what Lorraine had built: the irrigation system. Once we cleared the clogged pipes, was a marvel of engineering. She had designed it to collect and recycle water, minimizing waste. The ventilation system used a clever series of manually operated levers to create cross breezes regulating temperature without electricity. Even the orientation of the structure was deliberate, positioned to capture maximum sunlight during the winter months. It was a masterpiece of low-tech, sustainable design, and it had been built by our grandmother alone with her own hands. While we did the physical labor during the day, I spent every evening devouring Lorraine's journals. They were our Bible, our guide to everything we needed to know. She wrote about soil composition, explaining the difference between clay and loam and sand, and how to amend each for optimal growth. She wrote about companion planting, which vegetables grew well together, and which should be kept apart. She wrote about natural pest control, using ladybugs for aphids and marigolds to repel beetles. But more than the technical knowledge, she wrote about the business. She had identified a network of high-end restaurants in Portland and Seattle. Chefs who were desperate for the unique, flavorful produce that couldn't be found from large-scale suppliers. These weren't the kind of restaurants that bought tomatoes by the truckload from industrial farms. These were places where the chef's name was on the door, where every ingredient was chosen with care, where flavor mattered more than appearance. She had lists of names, contacts, and notes on who paid top dollar for what. She knew that Chef Bernard at the Orchard paid premium prices for heirloom tomatoes. She knew that a small bistro in the Pearl District would buy all the arugula she could grow. She knew which farmers' markets were worth the drive and which were a waste of time. She hadn't just been a gardener. She had been a businesswoman, a strategist. She had left us a business plan. The 90-day clock was always ticking in the back of my mind. It was like a drumbeat that never stopped, a constant reminder that everything we were building could be taken away. I found the tax delinquency notices in the chest with her other papers. Official documents on county letterhead, their language cold and bureaucratic. Years of unpaid taxes plus penalties, plus interest. The total was staggering. Nearly $8,000. Our seed money wouldn't even touch it. The developer's offer to buy out the lien and take possession was also in the papers. A company called Pinecrest Resorts. They were buying up land throughout the region for a new luxury resort development. Their offer was insulting. A few $1,000s for land that had been in our family for generations. For a greenhouse that had taken years to build. For a legacy that couldn't be measured in money. But it was starting to sound less like an insult and more like a lifeline. One night, about a month after we arrived, I sat alone by the dying fire in the cabin. Willa was asleep in her bunk, her breathing slow and even. Outside, rain hammered against the roof and the wind howled through the trees like something wounded. I had our meager savings spread out on the table. The cash from Mrs. Fairchild, the money from Lorraine, what little we'd been able to save from not spending. I counted it over and over as if the numbers might change if I just concentrated hard enough. They didn't change. We had maybe $2,800 left. We needed $8,000. We had less than 2 months until the county seized the property. There was no way, no possible way. The weight of it all crashed down on me. I put my head in my hands, my fingers digging into my scalp. I was 17 years old. I was supposed to be in high school worrying about homework and girls and what college I might go to. Instead, I was trying to save a piece of land with nothing but seeds and desperation. Who was I kidding? I was a foster kid, a statistic. I was programmed to fail. The system knew it. The developers knew it. Everyone knew it but me. The choice to stay, which had felt so heroic and defiant in the moment, now just felt stupid, reckless. I had gambled with our future, with Willa's safety, on a dead woman's dream. I made a decision. In the morning, I would walk into Oak Haven. I would find out how to contact the developer. I would take their money and get us somewhere warm and dry. Somewhere with running water and electricity. Somewhere that didn't require us to fight for every single day of survival. It was time to surrender. I slept badly that night. Dreams of failing. Dreams of Willa being taken away by social workers. Dreams of our grandmother. Her face hidden in shadow. Shaking her head in disappointment. When I woke, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. The fire had gone out and the cabin was cold. I lay in my bunk for a long time, staring at the wooden ceiling, trying to summon the courage to give up. Finally, I pulled on my boots and stepped outside. The air was washed clean by the rain. The forest smelled of wet earth and pine. Droplets of water clung to every surface, catching the weak morning light and glittering like jewels. Despite everything, it was beautiful. I walked toward the greenhouse, my shoulders slumped. I was going to tell Willa my decision. I was going to tell her that we had to leave, that I had failed. I rehearsed the words in my head. It's too much. We can't do it. The money will be better for us. They all sounded like excuses. They sounded like weakness. Because that's what they were. When I pushed through the bushes and entered the clearing around the greenhouse, the sight stopped me cold. The morning sun was breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. Golden light streamed through the newly cleaned glass, filling the entire space with a brilliant, almost holy glow. It illuminated the rich, dark soil in the freshly cleared beds. It touched the steel frame and made it shine. It wasn't a derelict ruin anymore. It was a cathedral of light. And in the center of that light was Willa. She was already at the potting bench, bent over her work. She had one of Lorraine's journals open in front of her, and she was carefully, painstakingly filling small starter pots with soil. Beside her were several of the small glass vials from the seed bank. She hadn't waited for me. She hadn't asked for permission. She hadn't needed my approval or my hope. She had just gotten to work. I stood there, watching her for a long moment. Her hands moved with a gentle precision that reminded me of our mother. Her face was set with concentration, a small furrow between her brows. She looked older than 15. She looked like someone who had found her purpose. She looked up and saw me. Her face broke into a smile. "Look," she said, holding up one of the vials. Inside were tiny, dark seeds no bigger than specks of pepper. I was reading about winter greens. Grandma says if we plant them now in starter pots, they'll be ready to transplant into the main beds in a few weeks. This variety of kale is really cold hardy. We could have a harvest before the first real snow. She held up another vial. And this arugula. She says it's the spiciest she's ever grown. There's a note here that a chef in Portland used to pay $30 a pound for it. $30, Emmett, for lettuce. The weight on my shoulders didn't lift, but something shifted beneath it. Something cracked. I thought about all the adults who had failed us. All the promises broken, all the doors closed. I thought about the system that had written us off before we were old enough to understand what was happening. And here was Willa, 15 years old, no experience, no resources, no reason to believe this could work. But she believed anyway. She was working anyway. Who was I to give up when she hadn't? I walked over to the bench. I picked up an empty pot. I started filling it with soil. "Okay," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "Show me which seeds go where." She smiled at me, and in that smile was everything. Trust, hope, love. We spent the entire day working together, filling hundreds of tiny pots, carefully placing 1 or 2 seeds in each, just as the journals instructed. It was tedious, meticulous work, but it felt meaningful. Every seed we planted was an act of faith, a vote for the future, a bet on ourselves. That evening, I walked into Oak Haven. But I didn't go looking for the developer. I went to the small public library, a single room in the back of the community center. The librarian, an elderly man with thick glasses, helped me access the computer. I looked up the county tax office. I found the name of the person in charge of delinquent properties, a woman named Mrs. Gentry, Chief Assessor. And then I wrote a letter. I introduced myself and Willa. I explained that we were the legal heirs to the Ashford property. I told them we had just taken possession and that we intended to pay the back taxes in full. I didn't say how. I didn't have any idea how. I just stated it as a fact. Then I made a proposal. I told them about the greenhouse, about our plan to bring it back to commercial operation, just as our grandmother had intended. I asked for a meeting. I asked for a chance to present our case. I asked for an extension, a payment plan, time to prove ourselves. I poured all of Lorraine's stubbornness, all of her fierce fighting spirit into that letter. I wrote and rewrote it until the library was closing. I printed it out, put it in an envelope, and mailed it at the post office. It felt like launching a message in a bottle into a vast, indifferent ocean. But it was something. It was action. It was fight. The weeks that followed blurred together in a rhythm of work and waiting. The first tiny green shoots began to emerge from the soil in our starter pots. Each one felt like a miracle. Willa and I would check on them every morning, crouching beside the potting bench in the pale winter light, marveling at the stubborn life pushing its way up through the darkness. The kale came first, then the chard, then the arugula, its distinctive jagged leaves announcing themselves with a peppery smell that filled the air when you touched them. They were small and fragile, but they were alive. We transplanted them into the main beds, which we had enriched with compost from a pile we found behind the greenhouse. Another gift from Lorraine. She had been composting for years, building up a supply of rich, dark soil, teeming with life. The plants took to it immediately, their roots spreading through the earth like they were coming home. Then the letter came. It arrived on a cold morning in late November, delivered by a mail carrier who had to drive all the way out to our mailbox on the main road. An official county envelope. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The letter was formal, sterile. It informed us that a hearing had been scheduled for December 15th. We were invited to present our case for a hardship extension to the deadline. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was a door, cracked open just an inch. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, going over everything I was gonna say. I had spent weeks preparing, studying Lorraine's business plans, gathering evidence of our progress, practicing my arguments until I could deliver them in my sleep. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. Emmett. The voice was familiar, tired. It's Mrs. Fairchild. I sat up in the dark. We hadn't heard from her since she dropped us at the bus station. I had wondered if she'd forgotten about us, if we'd already become just another closed case in her overflowing files. I got a call from my supervisor today, she said, who got a call from the county tax assessor. You've been making some noise. We're trying to save our home, I said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her sitting in some cramped office surrounded by files and forms, the weight of 100 broken children pressing down on her shoulders. I looked at your grandmother's old case file. She said, finally. Her voice was different now, softer. I read the notes, the petition she filed, the court documents, the appeals. Another pause. They really did railroad her, Emmett. She did everything right. She jumped through every hoop, and they still denied her. I'm sorry. We should have done more. I didn't know what to say. The anger I should have felt was muted by exhaustion, by the strange peace that came from finally knowing the truth. You did more than anyone, I said. You gave us the key. The hearing is tomorrow, right? Yes. They're not going to make it easy for you. The developer has connections, money, lawyers. I know. But you're going anyway. Yes. Another silence. Then, good. For the first time, I heard something that might have been a smile in her voice. Fight for it, Emmett. Fight for it with everything you've got. The county building was a squat brick structure on the outskirts of a small city about 30 miles from Oak Haven. We took the early bus dressed in the cleanest clothes we owned. I'd found an old button-down shirt in a trunk at the cabin, musty but intact. Willa wore a sweater she had washed in the creek and dried by the fire. We looked poor. We looked young. We looked exactly like what we were, two kids who had no business being there. The hearing room was small and windowless with fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered overhead. A long table at the front, 3 chairs behind it. An American flag in the corner. The smell of old coffee and older carpet. Mrs. Gentry sat in the center chair. She was maybe 60 with gray hair cut short and practical reading glasses perched on her nose. Her face gave nothing away. Beside her were 2 other officials, a man and a woman, both looking bored and impatient. At a table to our left sat a man in an expensive suit. He had slick-back hair and the kind of tan you only get from vacations in warm places. The developer's lawyer. He looked at us the way you might look at something unpleasant stuck to your shoe. "This hearing will come to order," Mrs. Gentry said. Her voice was flat bureaucratic. "Case number 2023-4471, regarding delinquent property taxes on the parcel known as the Ashford property, Route 7, Oak Haven." She shuffled some papers. "The petitioners, Emmett and Willa Ashford, have requested a hardship extension on the scheduled auction. They have also requested consideration of a payment plan for the outstanding balance of $7,842. She looked up at us over her glasses. "You have 15 minutes to make your case." I stood. My legs felt weak, but I locked my knees and forced myself to stay upright. I walked to the front of the room carrying a folder full of papers and photographs. "Thank you for hearing us," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Too young, too uncertain. I took a breath. I thought about Lorraine. I thought about the greenhouse filling with light. I thought about the tiny green shoots pushing up through the soil. "My name is Emmett Ashford. I'm 17 years old. This is my sister Willa. She's 15. Our grandmother Lorraine Ashford left us her property when she died. We only recently learned of this inheritance and took possession 2 months ago." I opened the folder. Our grandmother built a commercial greenhouse on this property. She cultivated rare heirloom vegetables and sold them to restaurants throughout the region. Her business was profitable and sustainable. She kept meticulous records. I held up one of Lorraine's journals. These are her notes. Decades of knowledge about growing, about selling, about running a small agricultural business. She left them to us, along with a seed bank containing hundreds of varieties of plants. Some of them are extremely rare and valuable. I passed the journal to Mrs. Gentry. She took it, her expression unchanged, and flipped through a few pages. "We've already begun restoring the greenhouse," I continued. I pulled out the photographs we had taken, before and after shots, the grimy glass and the clean glass, the dead plants and the empty beds, the starter pots filled with seedlings. "These are our winter greens. They'll be ready for harvest in about 6 weeks. We've already identified potential buyers from our grandmother's contacts. Restaurants in Portland and Seattle that used to purchase from her and are eager to do so again. I looked at Mrs. Gentry, trying to read her face. Nothing. Not a flicker of interest or sympathy. "We're not asking for charity," I said. "We're not asking for the debt to be forgiven. We're asking for time. Time to prove that we can make this property profitable again. Time to honor our grandmother's legacy." I swallowed hard. "We're asking for a chance to work." The developer's lawyer stood up. He was smiling, but it wasn't a kind smile. "If I may," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "This is a touching story. Truly. But it's not a business plan. These are children. They have no income, no assets, no experience. They're living in a condemned cabin with no electricity or running water. They're truant from school. They have no legal guardian." He turned to face the panel directly. "The responsible thing, the compassionate thing, is to accept Pinecrest's offer. We will pay the full delinquent amount plus provide these young people with a cash settlement that will help them get established somewhere more appropriate. They can use that money for housing, for education, for a real future." He glanced at us with practiced concern. "What they're proposing isn't a plan. It's a fantasy." The room was silent. I could feel Willa behind me, could sense her tension. Everything hung in the balance. Mrs. Gentry looked at me. Her face was still unreadable, but her eyes were sharp, measuring. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "you're 17 years old. In less than a year, you'll be a legal adult. But right now, you're a minor. Your sister is a minor. You have no parent or guardian. How do you expect to run a business? How do you expect to sign contracts, open bank accounts, make legal commitments?" It was the question I had been dreading. The question I didn't have a good answer for. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't have all the answers. I don't have any of the answers, really. All I have is this." I gestured at the photographs, the journals, the evidence of our work. "I have proof that we're not going to give up. I have proof that we can work hard and learn fast and adapt to whatever gets thrown at us. I have my grandmother's knowledge and her contacts and her seeds. And I have my sister, who is the hardest working person I've ever known." I took a deep breath. "You're right. It's probably a fantasy. A reasonable person would take the money and walk away. But my grandmother wasn't reasonable. She spent 30 years building something in the middle of nowhere because she believed in it. She believed in us. She believed we could do something that everyone said was impossible." I looked Mrs. Gentry directly in the eyes. "Give us 6 months. Let us prove we can make a significant payment by then. If we can't, the property is yours. You can auction it off, and the developer gets what they want anyway. But if we can show you that this is real, that we can make this work, then you'll have done something more valuable than collecting on a debt. You'll have helped 2 kids build a life." The silence stretched out like a held breath. Mrs. Gentry exchanged looks with her colleagues. The man shrugged. The woman tilted her head slightly, something almost like approval in her expression. The developer's lawyer was already opening his mouth to object when Mrs. Gentry raised her hand. 6 months. she said. The lawyer froze mid-word. You have until May 1st to make a significant payment toward the delinquency, not a token payment. Significant, at least $5,000. If you do, we will establish a formal payment plan for the remainder. If you do not, the property will be seized and auctioned on May 2nd. There will be no further extensions. She closed her folder with a sharp snap. This hearing is adjourned. We walked out of that building into the cold winter air, and for the first time in my life, I felt like we might actually have a future. We had won. We had won a stay of execution. 6 months to perform a miracle. The months that followed were a blur of relentless work. Winter settled over the woods, blanketing the world in a thick layer of snow. The cabin was our sanctuary, kept warm by the wood stove. The greenhouse was our laboratory, our factory, and our hope. The cold, hardy greens we had planted thrived in the protected environment of the greenhouse. The glass walls trapped the weak winter sunlight, keeping the interior warm enough for the plants to grow even as frost painted the outside world white. We had kale and chard and that spicy arugula growing in neat rows, like soldiers standing at attention. Our first real harvest came in late January. It wasn't much, maybe 20 pounds of greens in total. But holding those crisp, vibrant leaves in my hands felt like holding solid gold. This was proof. This was real. We had planted seeds, and they had grown, and now we had something to sell. Getting it to market was the next hurdle. Oak Haven was too small. There was no demand there for specialty produce. We needed to get to Portland, to the restaurants and farmers markets, where people would pay premium prices for quality. We used a chunk of our precious cash to buy a beat-up old pickup truck from a farmer in the next town over. It was a rust bucket, a 1987 Ford that had seen better days decades ago. The paint was more primer than color. The bed was dented and the heater worked only when it felt like it. But the engine was sound. It started every time, even on the coldest mornings. I was only 17 with no license, but necessity became my teacher. I learned to drive on the empty logging roads around our property, grinding the gears and stalling out more times than I could count. I practiced until I could manage the clutch without thinking, until I could navigate the winding mountain roads without my knuckles going white on the steering wheel. Our first sales trip was in early February. We woke before dawn, loaded the truck with carefully packed boxes of our greens, and drove the 2 hours into Portland. The city felt like another planet after months in the woods. The noise, the traffic, the sheer number of people. It was overwhelming. We looked completely out of place. 2 kids in worn work clothes driving a rust bucket pickup, pulling up to the back door of a restaurant that had a Michelin star in the window. The kind of place where a meal cost more than we'd spend on food in a month. I asked for the head chef, a man named Declan, just like the journal said. A busy line cook barely glanced at us before telling us to get lost. I almost did. But then I remembered Lorraine's stubborn jaw in that photograph. I remembered the greenhouse filling with light. I remembered Willa planting seeds before dawn, because she believed in something even when I didn't. I stood my ground. "Please," I said, "just tell him Lorraine Ashford's grandchildren are here." The cook looked annoyed, but something in my voice must have gotten through. He disappeared into the kitchen and we waited. The back alley smelled of garbage and exhaust. I was shivering not from cold but from nerves. Then the door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and intense with gray streaking his dark hair, and the kind of presence that made you stand up straighter. He had flour on his apron and a towel over his shoulder. His eyes were sharp, taking us in with a single glance. "I'm Chef Declan," he said. His voice was deep accented slightly. Irish, I would learn later. "You said you're Lorraine's grandchildren." I nodded, not trusting my voice. He looked at the box of greens I was holding. Without asking permission, he reached in and took a leaf of arugula. He sniffed it first, closing his eyes. Then he tasted it, chewing slowly. His expression thoughtful. His eyes widened. "My God," he said, "I haven't tasted this in 20 years. He took another leaf, tasted it again. "Your grandmother," he said slowly, "was a genius, an artist. I used to drive 2 hours each way just to pick up her produce. When she stopped selling, I thought this flavor was lost forever." He looked at us then, really looked at us. Saw our worn clothes and our nervous faces and our desperate hope. "She talked about you," he said. "Her grandchildren. She said someday you'd come back." I thought it was just an old woman's wishful thinking. He reached for his wallet. "How much do you have?" We sold everything that day. Every leaf, every stem. Chef Declan paid us more than the prices in Lorraine's journals, more than I had dared to hope for. And he gave us something more valuable than money. He gave us names. Other chefs who had known our grandmother. Other restaurants that would want our produce. He made phone calls while we stood there vouching for us, introducing us, opening doors that would have stayed firmly closed otherwise. "Your grandmother built something special," he said as we were leaving. "Something real. Don't let anyone take it from you." That was the beginning. Over the next few months, we followed the list in the journal, visiting other restaurants. Not everyone was as welcoming as Chef Declan. Some doors were closed in our faces. Some chefs were too busy to see us. Some looked at our age and our clothes and decided we weren't worth their time. But enough of them remembered Lorraine. Enough of them tasted our produce and saw the quality. Enough of them were willing to take a chance on 2 kids from the woods. The word spread. The story of Eleanor's grandchildren, the kids who had come out of nowhere to revive a legendary greenhouse, was as compelling as the produce itself. Chefs talked to other chefs. Food writers started asking questions. We became something of a legend in the Portland food scene. The kids from the woods with the magic vegetables. The work was grueling. We were up before dawn, harvesting in the cold greenhouse, our breath misting in the air. Then packing, loading the truck, driving. Dealing with chefs and kitchen managers, some kind and some rude. Driving back in the dark, exhausted, only to spend the evening planning the next day, studying the journals, tending to the new seedlings we were constantly planting. Willa took over the propagation side of things. Her small, nimble fingers were perfect for handling the tiny seeds and delicate seedlings. She had a natural talent for it, an intuitive understanding of what the plants needed. She would spend hours in the greenhouse talking to the seedlings, adjusting their positions, making sure each one had exactly what it needed to thrive. She wasn't the scared, quiet girl who had stood on that curb anymore. She was a botanist, a businesswoman. She had found her place in the world, and she was blooming just like the plants she tended. As spring approached, the greenhouse exploded with life. We had planted the first of the heirloom tomatoes, the strange and wonderful varieties from Lorraine's seed bank. Cherokee purple with their dusky, complex flavor. Brandywine huge and meaty. Green zebra striped and tangy, and dozens of others, each with its own story, its own history, its own connection to generations of gardeners who had saved and shared these seeds. We grew purple carrots and striped beets, tiny sweet peppers that looked like jewels, cucumbers shaped like lemons. The greenhouse was no longer just a structure of steel and glass. It was a living catalog of our grandmother's love. By the end of March, we had saved nearly $5,000. Not enough to pay off the entire debt, but maybe, just maybe, enough to meet Mrs. Gentry's requirement for a significant payment. But we needed more. The deadline was May 1st. The tomatoes wouldn't be ready until late April at the earliest. Everything depended on that crop. The spring sun grew stronger. The days grew longer. The tomato plants grew tall and lush, their stems thick, their leaves a deep, healthy green. Small yellow flowers appeared, then tiny green fruits that swelled a little more each day. We were going to make it. I could feel it. Against all odds, we were going to make it. And then the sky turned dark. It came without warning. A late spring storm, the kind that happens once every few years in Oregon. The weather report mentioned a possibility of scattered showers. Nothing to worry about. But this wasn't scattered showers. It was a freak hailstorm. The wind picked up around noon, the temperature dropped 10 degrees in an hour, and the sky turned a sickly greenish gray. Then the hail came. The sound was like machine guns on the glass roof of the greenhouse, like 1,000 angry fists pounding on the windows. We ran from the cabin, Willa and I, running toward the greenhouse, running toward the sound of our dreams being shattered. We couldn't get inside. The hail was two intense chunks of ice the size of marbles bouncing off the ground, off our shoulders, off our heads. We huddled under the porch of the cabin and watched in horror as the storm tore through everything we had built. Several large panes of glass on the roof gave way. Not all of them, but enough. The crash of breaking glass mixed with the roar of the storm. Through the gaps, the hail poured in, falling directly onto the beds below, onto our tomatoes. The storm lasted maybe 15 minutes. When it passed, the silence that followed was deafening. The world was covered in a white layer of ice pellets, melting in the sudden return of the sun, turning everything to slush. We ran to the greenhouse. Inside was devastation. The hail had shredded a quarter of our plants. The tomatoes, the beautiful heirloom tomatoes that were weeks away from harvest, were beaten down. Stems snapped. Fruit crushed. Leaves torn to ribbons. I stood in the middle of the destruction water dripping through the holes in the roof, the afternoon sun streaming through the gaps, like some kind of cruel joke. We were so close. We were weeks away from having enough. And now this. Willa came up beside me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I turned and walked out of the greenhouse. I walked past the cabin, past the well, deep into the woods. I walked until I couldn't walk anymore. And then I sat down on a fallen log and put my head in my hands. The tears came. Not gentle tears, but the kind that rack your whole body. The kind that feel like they're being torn out of you. I cried for everything I had lost. For our parents. For our childhood. For our grandmother who we never got to meet. I cried because I had tried so hard, and it still wasn't enough. The system always won. It always found a way to knock you down just when you thought you were getting up. It always reminded you that you were nothing. Nobody, just another statistic waiting to fail. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the sun to start setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to mock my despair. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Willa's small form appeared through the trees. She was carrying something in her hands, one of Lorraine's journals, and a cup of tea somehow still steaming. She sat down beside me on the log. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me the tea. It was warm in my cold hands. Then she opened the journal to a page she had marked. She read aloud, her voice soft but steady. The best seed is not the one that produces the biggest fruit. It is the one that survives the harshest winter. It is the one that grows back after the frost. It is the one that refuses to give up no matter what the world throws at it. That is the seed worth saving. That is the seed that carries the future. She closed the journal and looked at me. We're still here, Emmett. We're still surviving. The greenhouse isn't destroyed. Most of the plants are still okay. We lost some tomatoes, but we have other things. The greens, the herbs, the root vegetables we planted last month. She put her hand on my arm. We can still do this, but only if we don't give up. I looked at my little sister, 15 years old. She had been through everything. Had lost everything I had lost. But there was no defeat in her eyes, only determination. She believed in this. She believed in us. How could I do any less? I wiped my eyes. I took a deep breath. Okay, I said. What do we do? She smiled. That same smile from the morning when she showed me the seedlings. That smile that held all the hope in the world. We harvest what we can save, she said. Some of the tomatoes are still good. The rest of the produce is fine. We call every restaurant we've ever sold to and we tell them what happened. We ask for help. We ask for early orders, for deposits, for anything they can give us. She stood up and held out her hand. And we don't stop working until May 1st. I took her hand and stood. Together we walked back to the greenhouse. The sun was setting, but we had work to do. We had a miracle to perform. And we had less than 2 weeks to do it. The morning after the storm, we surveyed the damage in the harsh light of day. It was worse than I had thought. And somehow also better. The glass panes that had shattered were concentrated on the northern section of the roof, directly above our prized tomato beds. The Cherokee purples, the ones Chef Declan had been waiting for all spring, were devastated. Maybe a quarter of them destroyed outright, another quarter badly damaged. The plants that survived were battered and bruised, their leaves torn, their developing fruit pockmarked with hail scars. But the rest of the greenhouse had been spared. The southern beds, protected by the angle of the roof and the way the wind had driven the hail, were largely untouched. The greens were fine. The herbs were fine. The root vegetables, safely underground, hadn't even noticed the storm. We had lost maybe 30% of our total crop. It was a blow, a serious blow, but it wasn't total destruction. It wasn't the end. Still, the math was brutal. We had about $4,500 saved. We needed at least $5,000 for Mrs. Gentry, and that was the absolute minimum. Ideally, we needed more. We needed to show that we could actually pay down the debt, not just scrape by with the bare minimum. 10 days until May 1st. 10 days to make up for what the storm had taken. We started that morning by covering the holes in the roof. We found rolls of heavy plastic sheeting in the shed, the kind farmers use to protect equipment from weather. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it would keep out the rain and retain heat. We worked for hours climbing ladders, stretching plastic, securing it with wooden strips nailed into the frame. By noon, the greenhouse was sealed again. Not as good as glass, but functional. The plants inside would survive. Then we turned to the harvest. We went through every bed, every plant, assessing what could be saved. Some of the damaged tomatoes, the ones that were only bruised on one side, could still be sold as seconds. The restaurants might not want them for their main dishes, but they could use them for sauces, for soups, for the 100 other preparations where appearance didn't matter. Willa had the idea to harvest the greens early. They were a little smaller than we usually sold them, but they were still good, still flavorful, still worth money. Better to sell them now than to risk another disaster. We spent the afternoon picking washing and packing, box after box of produce stacked in the cabin, because the truck was too small to hold it all at once. That evening, I sat down with our list of customers and started making calls. The first call was to Chef Declan. I told him what had happened. The storm, the damage, the desperate situation we were in. I told him we had less than 2 weeks to come up with enough money to save the property, and that we had just lost a significant portion of our crop. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "How much do you need?" he asked. "As much as we can get," I said. "Every dollar counts." "I was planning to wait another few weeks for the Cherokee purples," he said slowly. "But I can adjust my menu. What do you have that's ready now?" I told him about the greens, the herbs, the root vegetables, the damaged tomatoes that were still good for cooking. "Send me everything," he said. "Every last leaf and root. I'll pay premium prices, same as always. And I'll talk to some other chefs I know, see if they can place early orders too." I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of tension that had been tightening since the storm. "Thank you," I said. The words felt inadequate. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Just keep fighting. Your grandmother would be proud of you." The next week was a blur of movement. We drove to Portland 4 times in those 10 days, each trip loaded with every bit of produce we could harvest. Chef Declan was true to his word, buying everything we brought and paying top prices. He had also spread the word. Other restaurants, some we had sold to before, and some we hadn't, started placing orders. The story of the storm spread through the Portland food community. 2 kids from the woods fighting to save their grandmother's legacy, nearly destroyed by a freak hailstorm. It was the kind of story people wanted to be part of, the kind of story that made them want to help. One restaurant owner, a woman named Margaret, who ran a farm-to-table place in the Pearl District, ordered double her usual amount and paid cash in advance. "I knew your grandmother," she said, pressing the bills into my hand. "She used to bring me tomatoes that tasted like summer itself. I always wondered what happened to her. Now I know." Another chef, a young guy named Pete, who had just opened his own place, bought everything we had left over after our other deliveries. His prices weren't as high as some of the others, but every dollar mattered. "I've been following your story," he said. "Some of the other chefs have been talking about you. The kids who came out of nowhere with the magic vegetables." He grinned. "It's a good story. People want you to win." Back in Oak Haven, Opal heard about the storm through the grapevine. News travels fast in small towns, even when you live 3 miles into the woods. She found us in the general store during one of our supply runs. We were buying rope and nails to better secure the plastic sheeting on the greenhouse roof. "Heard you had some trouble," she said, her sharp eyes taking in our exhausted faces, our dirt-stained clothes. "A storm," I said. "Hail. Took out part of our crop." She nodded slowly. "Bad luck." She paused. "Or maybe not luck at all. Sometimes the universe tests us, sees what we're made of." She reached under the counter and pulled out a small cardboard box. "Got some things here that might help. Day-old bread like usual. Some canned goods that are past their sell date but still good. And some other stuff folks have been dropping off." I looked in the box. Besides the food, there were work gloves, a coil of wire, a small toolkit, and an envelope. "What's the envelope?" "Folks around here remember your grandmother," Opal said. "She used to help people out when they needed it. Gave away vegetables when families were struggling. Never made a big deal of it, just left baskets on porches and drove away. Some of those families, their kids are grown now. Got kids of their own. They wanted to return the favor." I opened the envelope. Inside was cash. 10s and 20s mostly. Maybe $200 total. "This is too much," I said. "We can't accept this." "You can and you will," Opal said firmly. "Pride is a fine thing, but it makes a poor meal. Your grandmother understood that. She gave when she could, and she accepted when she needed to. That's how community works." She fixed me with those sharp bird eyes. "You're not alone out there in those woods, boy. You never were. This town hasn't forgotten the Ashfords, and we're not about to let you fail if there's anything we can do about it." I didn't know what to say. The generosity, the unexpected kindness from people we barely knew, it was overwhelming. In the foster system, you learn to be suspicious of kindness. It usually came with strings attached, with expectations, with conditions that would eventually be used against you. But this was different. This was a community reaching out to embrace us. This was people who had known our grandmother and loved her, and wanted to see her legacy survive. "Thank you," I managed. It was all I could say. Opal nodded once briskly. "Now get out of here. You've got work to do." 6 days before the deadline, something unexpected happened. A familiar beat-up sedan pulled up to the cabin in the late afternoon. I recognized it immediately, even before the driver's door opened. Mrs. Fairchild. She got out slowly, looking around at the clearing at the cabin. with its new patches on the roof at the path leading back to the greenhouse. Her face was unreadable. Willa came out of the cabin wiping her hands on a towel. She had been inside canning some of our surplus vegetables, a skill she had learned from one of Lorraine's journals. "Mrs. Fairchild," she said, surprised. "Hello, Willa." The caseworker's voice was softer than I remembered. "Emmett, you two have been busy." We walked her back to the greenhouse. I watched her face as she took it in, the scale of it, the rows of healthy plants, the evidence of our work everywhere. Her expression shifted from professional neutrality to something like wonder. "This is incredible," she said. "I had no idea it was this extensive." "Grandma built it over 30 years," Willa said. "We've been trying to restore it. You've done more than restore it," Mrs. Fairchild said. "You've brought it back to life." She turned to face us. "I heard about the storm, the damage. I've been making some calls, talking to people." She paused. "After the hearing, after what you said, I couldn't stop thinking about this case, about you two, about what your grandmother went through." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "I told some people at my office your story, the real story. What actually happened to your grandmother, how the system failed her, and how it's been failing you. I showed them the court documents, the petitions, everything I could find." She held out the envelope. "Some of us wanted to help. We passed a hat. It's not much, not from government salaries, but we also reached out to a charity that helps at-risk youth start small businesses. They were willing to contribute." I took the envelope. It felt heavy in my hands. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was cash and a check. The check was from an organization called New Roots Foundation, made out for $1,500. The cash added up to about another $700. $2,200. I stared at it, unable to process what I was seeing. "Why?" I asked. My voice came out hoarse. Mrs. Fairchild's professional mask finally cracked. What I saw underneath was just a tired woman who had seen too many children fall through the cracks, who had carried the weight of a broken system for too long. "Because the system failed you," she said quietly. "It failed your grandmother. It fails thousands of kids every year, and most of them don't have anyone fighting for them. Most of them don't have a grandmother who spent 30 years building them a future. Most of them just disappear into the statistics." She looked at the greenhouse, the sunlight streaming through the plastic-patched roof, the green life growing in every direction. "But you two didn't disappear. You fought back. You took the worst hand imaginable, and you're playing it better than anyone could have expected. That matters. That gives people hope." She looked back at us. "I've been doing this job for 23 years. In all that time, I've never seen anything like what you've accomplished here. I've never seen two kids refuse to give up the way you have." Her voice caught slightly. "It makes me believe that maybe the system can still be redeemed. That maybe some of us can still make a difference." Willa stepped forward and hugged her. It was sudden, unexpected, and completely genuine. Mrs. Fairchild stood stiff for a moment, surprised. Then her arms came up and she hugged Willa back. "Thank you," Willa said, "for everything. For giving us the key. For believing in us." Mrs. Fairchild wiped her eyes when they separated. Don't thank me yet. You've still got work to do." She left a few minutes later after walking through the greenhouse one more time, marveling at what we had built. I stood on the porch and watched her car disappear down the dirt road, still holding the envelope full of money. We weren't alone. That was the realization that kept hitting me over and over. All these years I had believed we were alone in the world. Two orphans against an indifferent universe. But that wasn't true. People cared. People wanted to help. We just had to let them. The final days were a desperate sprint. We harvested everything that was ready, some things that weren't quite ready, and made 3 more trips to Portland. We sold to every restaurant that would take our produce. We sold at the farmer's market on Saturday, setting up a small table with handwritten signs telling our story to anyone who would listen. People wanted to hear. They wanted to be part of something. They bought our vegetables not just because they were good, but because buying them meant supporting 2 kids who were fighting to save their home. I kept a running tally in my head, updated after every sale. The numbers climbed. 4,500, 4,800, 5,000, 5,200. 3 days before the deadline, we counted everything. All the money we had saved, all the donations, all the sales. We had $6,200. It wasn't enough to pay off the whole debt. But it was more than the minimum. It was enough to show that we were serious. It was enough to negotiate. The night of April 30th, we sat in the cabin, the fire crackling in the hearth. Our savings spread out on the table. "We did it," Willa said softly. "We actually did it." I nodded, still not quite believing it myself. 2 months ago, we had been 2 kids standing on a curb with garbage bags full of clothes. Now we had a home, a business, and a future. Not a guaranteed future. Not an easy future. But a future nonetheless. "We're not done yet," I said. "We still have to convince Mrs. Gentry to accept our payment and set up a plan for the rest." "She will," Willa said with a confidence I wished I shared. "She saw us at the hearing. She knows we're serious." I hoped she was right. The morning of May 1st dawned clear and bright. The kind of spring morning that feels like a promise. The kind of morning where anything seems possible. We put on our cleanest clothes. I wore the same button-down shirt I had worn to the hearing, now washed and pressed as best we could manage. Willa wore a dress she had found in a trunk at the cabin, one that had belonged to our grandmother. It was a little old-fashioned, but it fit her perfectly. We drove the old truck to the county building. The same squat brick structure, the same flickering fluorescent lights, the same smell of old coffee and older carpet. But something was different this time. This time we weren't coming to plead for more time. We were coming to make good on our promise. I carried a cashier's check for $5,000, leaving us enough for operating expenses and emergencies. In my pocket was a folder with all our financial records, our sales receipts, our business plan for the coming year. We signed in at the front desk and waited. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we were called back to Mrs. Gentry's office. Not the hearing room this time, but a small, cluttered office with stacks of files on every surface and a window that looked out on a parking lot. Mrs. Gentry was behind her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, a cup of coffee at her elbow. She looked up as we entered. "Mr. and Miss Ashford," she said. Right on time. Yes, ma'am, I said. She gestured for us to sit. We did. I'll admit, she said, leaning back in her chair, I didn't expect to see you here today. When you left that hearing in December, I gave you maybe a 10% chance of making it. We're stubborn, I said. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Apparently. I reached into my folder and pulled out the cashier's check. I placed it on her desk. $5,000, as agreed. She picked up the check, examined it, set it down. This is a significant payment, she acknowledged. But you still owe nearly $3,000 more plus whatever interest accrues. How do you plan to address that? I pulled out the rest of my documentation, our sales records, our list of regular customers, our projections for the coming growing season based on the crops we had already planted and the relationships we had built. We're profitable, I said. Small scale profitable, but it's real income. We've been selling to restaurants in Portland and Seattle, places that pay premium prices for the kind of produce we grow. We've established relationships that will continue into the summer and fall. I showed her the numbers. Based on our current trajectory, we can pay off the remaining debt within a year, maybe sooner depending on how well the summer crops do. We're asking for a formal payment plan, monthly installments that we can manage alongside our operating expenses. Mrs. Gentry looked through the documents carefully. She asked questions about specific line items, about our costs, about our pricing strategy. Her tone was professional, neutral, giving nothing away. Finally, she set down the papers and looked at us. You know, she said, I've been doing this job for a long time. Seen a lot of people make promises they couldn't keep. A lot of people with big plans and no follow-through. She paused. I've also seen the system chew up and spit out good people. People who deserve better. People who got caught in bureaucracy and regulations and never had a chance. She looked at the check again, then back at us. Your grandmother was one of those people. I looked up her case after your hearing, read the files. The petition she submitted to gain custody of you was one of the most thorough I've ever seen. She had everything in order. Character references, financial statements, a detailed plan for your education and care. But she had that one mark on her record from 40 years ago, and that was enough for the court to deny her. Her voice softened slightly. It wasn't fair, but the system isn't always fair. Sometimes it's up to individuals to make things right. She picked up a pen and signed something on one of the documents in front of her. I'm approving a payment plan. 12 monthly installments for the remaining balance starting June 1st. As long as you make your payments on time, the county will not pursue any further action against the property. She stamped the document and slid it across the desk to me. Welcome back to the tax rolls, Mr. Ashford. I looked at the paper. My hand was shaking as I picked it up. We had done it. Against all odds, against everyone's expectations, we had done it. Thank you, I said. The words felt completely inadequate. Don't thank me, Mrs. Gentry said. Thank your grandmother. She built something worth saving. You two just had the sense to recognize it. She stood and offered her hand. I shook it. Then Willa shook it. Good luck, Mrs. Gentry said. Something tells me you won't need it. We walked out of that building into the spring sunshine, the signed agreement in my hand. and for the first time in my life, I felt like the future was something to look forward to instead of something to fear. 1 year later, the greenhouse gleamed in the summer light. Every pane of glass had been replaced proper glass, this time not plastic sheeting. The steel frame had been repainted. The irrigation system had been upgraded with new pipes and fittings. The ventilation system worked perfectly, the levers moving smoothly on well-oiled hinges. Inside, the beds were bursting with life. Tomatoes heavy on the vine, peppers in every color of the rainbow, cucumbers and squash and beans climbing their trellises, herbs perfuming the air with rosemary and basil and thyme. It had been a good year, a very good year. We had paid off the remaining debt 3 months ahead of schedule. The tax office had our final payment, and the lien on the property was officially cleared. The land was ours, free and clear. No more 90-day clocks. No more deadlines. No more fear. The business had grown beyond anything we had imagined. We now supplied 14 restaurants regularly, including some of the best in Portland and Seattle. Chef Declan had become something of a mentor, introducing us to other chefs, helping us navigate the business side of things, always paying premium prices for our best produce. The cabin had been transformed. We had run a power line from the main road, a major investment that had been worth every penny. We had electricity now, a real refrigerator, lights that didn't require lamp oil, a small television that we hardly ever watched because we were usually too tired from working. But more than that, we had made it a home. We had rebuilt the porch, replacing the rotted boards with fresh-cut lumber. We had painted the exterior a warm red that stood out against the green of the forest. We had planted flowers around the foundation, the same varieties that Lorraine had mentioned in her journals. It looked like a place where people lived, where a family lived. Willa was 17 now. She had completed her high school equivalency through an online program, studying at night after long days in the greenhouse. She had scored in the top percentile on every test, and she had been accepted to the State University's agricultural science program with a partial scholarship. My little sister, the scared girl who had stood on that curb clutching her backpack, was going to college. She was going to become a real botanist. She was going to have the kind of future that the system had tried to deny us. I was 19, legally an adult for whatever that was worth. I had taken over the business side of things, completely handling the finances, the deliveries, the customer relationships. I'd gotten my driver's license properly registered. The truck in my name opened a business bank account. We had named our operation Lorraine's Garden in honor of the woman who had made it all possible. Chef Declan had helped us design a simple logo, her name in elegant script with a stylized tomato above it. We had it printed on our invoices, on the labels we used for our produce, on the signs we set up at farmers markets. Her name lived on. Her dream lived on. The evening of that anniversary, I sat on the rebuilt porch watching the sun set through the trees. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold and pink colors that seemed too beautiful to be real. Willa was in the greenhouse. I could see her silhouette through the glass, moving among the plants, checking on her experiments. She had started her own breeding program, crossing different varieties to create new combinations. She had already developed a cherry tomato that was sweeter than anything on the market, and several seed companies had expressed interest in carrying it. She was her grandmother's heir in every way that mattered. She had inherited not just the seeds and the knowledge, but the passion, the curiosity, the stubborn refusal to accept limitations. I heard a car coming up the road. Not the rough rumble of a truck, but the smooth purr of a well-maintained engine. Probably a customer, I thought. Some of the restaurants sent their own people to pick up orders, preferring the freshest possible produce. But when the car came into view, I recognized it immediately. A familiar, beat-up sedan tan paint faded and scratched one hubcap still missing. Mrs. Fairchild. She pulled up in front of the cabin and got out, slowly looking around, with the same wonder she had shown on her last visit. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered," she said. "We've been busy," I said. I stood and walked down the porch steps to meet her. "So I've heard." She smiled. "Chef Declan talks about you to anyone who will listen. Says you're the best suppliers he's ever had. He's been good to us. You've been good to him, and to everyone else you work with." She paused. "I came to tell you something, to give you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a file folder, official looking with the state seal on the cover. "What's this?" "It's Willa's case file, or rather what's left of it." She handed it to me. "As of today, her case is officially closed. She's no longer a ward of the state. The court has recognized you as her legal guardian given your stable income, your fixed address, and your demonstrated ability to provide for her welfare." I stared at the folder. The words didn't quite make sense. "What does that mean?" "It means she's yours, Emmett. Legally, officially, permanently yours. No more caseworkers. No more home visits. No more threat of being separated. The state has no more claim on her." I opened the folder. Inside was a court order stamped and signed by a judge. It declared that Emmett Ashford, age 19, was hereby granted full legal guardianship of his minor sister, Willa Ashford, age 17. Full legal guardianship. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. All those years, all those placements, all those nights lying awake terrified that the next phone call would be the one that tore us apart. All the fighting, all the struggling, all the desperate clinging to each other, in a world that seemed determined to break us. It was over. We were a family. Officially, legally, forever. "I wanted to deliver this in person," Mrs. Fairchild said. Her own eyes were suspiciously bright. "After everything you've been through, you deserved more than a letter in the mail." I couldn't speak. I just stood there holding the folder, tears streaming down my face. Willa came out of the greenhouse, then having seen the car arrive. She walked over, wiping her hands on her jeans, looking curious. "Mrs. Fairchild, is everything okay?" I handed her the folder. She opened it, read the first few lines, and then she was crying too. "It's over," she said, her voice breaking. "It's really over." She threw her arms around me and I held her tight, the same way I had held her on that curb a year ago. But everything was different now. We weren't two scared kids with nowhere to go. We were survivors. We were business owners. We were family. Mrs. Fairchild let us have our moment. When we finally pulled apart, she was smiling through her own tears. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she said. "You did everything she hoped you would do, and more." You saved each other. We had help, I said. From you, from Chef Declan, from Opal and the people in town, from everyone who believed in us. You inspired that belief, Mrs. Fairchild said. You earned it with every choice you made, every day you refused to give up. The help was just the world responding to what you put out into it. She looked around one more time at the cabin, the greenhouse, the peaceful clearing surrounded by ancient trees. I've been doing this job for almost 25 years, she said. I've seen hundreds of kids go through the system. Most of them end up lost, broken, forgotten. The statistics are brutal and they never seem to get better. She turned back to us. But every once in a while I see something like this. Two kids who take the worst hand imaginable and turn it into something beautiful. Two kids who refuse to be statistics. Two kids who prove that the system doesn't have to have the last word. She smiled. You give me hope, Emmett. You and Willa. You remind me why I do this job even when it breaks my heart. She hugged us both, one arm around each of us, and then she got back in her car and drove away. We watched until the sedan disappeared around the bend in the road, the sound of its engine fading into the chorus of crickets and birdsong. Willa leaned against my shoulder. What do we do now? She asked. I thought about the question. It was the same question she had asked that first night in the greenhouse when we had found the letter from our grandmother and made the choice to stay. But the answer was different now. Now we live, I said. We build. We grow. We keep honoring Grandma's legacy. We keep proving that second chances are real. I looked at the greenhouse gleaming in the last light of the setting sun. And we keep planting seeds. 2 years later. The evening was warm and soft, the sky fading from gold to purple as the sun sank below the tree line. I sat on the porch of our cabin, a glass of iced tea in my hand, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. The clearing had changed so much from that first night. The cabin had been expanded, a second room added for Willa's visits home from college. The garden around the foundation was established now, full of perennials that came back stronger every year. A gravel path led from the cabin to the greenhouse lined with solar lights that would flicker on as darkness fell. It looked like a place that had been loved for generations. Because it had been, and it still was. Willa was home for the summer working in the greenhouse like she always did. But now she brought knowledge from her professors, new techniques, new ideas. She had already published her first paper in an agricultural journal about the heirloom seed varieties we were preserving. Scientists from 3 different universities had reached out to study our collection. Lorraine's seeds were becoming famous. Her life's work, hidden in a locked chest in a forgotten greenhouse, was now recognized as one of the most significant private collections of heirloom varieties in the Pacific Northwest. We had donated samples to seed banks around the world. We had taught workshops on heirloom cultivation. We had been featured in magazines and newspapers. The greenhouse that one woman had built in secret out of love and stubbornness and desperate hope was now a model for sustainable agriculture. Other young farmers came to learn from us. Other lost kids came to see that there was a different path, a better path than the one the world had laid out for them. We had started a program with help from Chef Declan and some of the other restaurant owners who supported us. We took in foster kids during the summers, taught them how to grow things, how to work with their hands, how to build something real. Some of them went back to their placements with new skills and new confidence. Some of them came back year after year. We couldn't save everyone. We couldn't fix the system that had failed us, but we could make a difference one seed at a time, one kid at a time. That evening, as the stars came out overhead, I thought about everything we had been through. The curb where we had stood with our garbage bags, the bus ride through the mountains, the first sight of the cabin small and broken and beautiful, the greenhouse hidden and waiting, the letter from our grandmother full of love that had outlasted death itself. I thought about the choice we had made, the hard path, the impossible path, the path that everyone said we would fail. We hadn't failed. We had survived. We had thrived. We had built something that mattered, something that would outlast us, something that would keep giving and growing long after we were gone. That was the real inheritance, not the land or the greenhouse or the seeds. It was the understanding that we were not defined by our circumstances. We were defined by our choices, by what we decided to build, what we decided to fight for, what we decided to cultivate in ourselves and in the world. Willa came out of the greenhouse as the last light faded. Her silhouette moved along the gravel path, and then she was climbing the porch steps, settling into the chair beside me. "Good day?" I asked. "Great day," she said. "The experimental tomatoes are almost ready for harvest. I think they're going to be even better than last year. They always are." She was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars. "I was thinking about Grandma today," she said. "About that first night when we read her letter. About how scared we were. How impossible everything seemed." "It was impossible," I said. "By any reasonable measure, we should have failed. We were kids with nothing going up against a system that didn't care about us. But we didn't fail. No, we didn't." She turned to look at me. In the starlight, her face was older than the scared 15-year-old who had stood on that curb. But her eyes were the same, full of determination, full of hope. "Do you think she knew?" Willa asked. "When she wrote that letter, when she built all of this, do you think she really believed we would come back? That we would find it? That we would make it work?" I thought about the question, about our grandmother alone in these woods for decades, planting and harvesting and saving seeds that might never be used, writing journals that might never be read, building a legacy that might never be claimed. "I think she believed in us," I said finally. "Not because she knew what would happen, but because she had to. Because believing in us was the only way she could keep going after the system took us away from her." I looked at the greenhouse, its glass walls reflecting the stars like a second sky. She couldn't save us herself. So she built something that could. She planted seeds of hope and waited for us to find them. And in the end, that faith was justified. Willa was quiet for a long moment. "We're the harvest of her heart," she said, softly quoting the letter. That's what she wrote. "We're the harvest of her heart." "We are," I agreed. "And now it's our turn to plant seeds for the next generation, to build something that will outlast us, to have faith in people we'll never meet." The fireflies danced in the darkness. The crickets sang their ancient songs. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but beautiful nonetheless. We sat there together, my sister and I, in the home our grandmother had built for us. The home we had saved. The home we had earned through sweat and tears and stubborn refusal to give up. The greenhouse hadn't just saved us from homelessness. It had saved us from the story the world wanted to write for us. The story of foster kids as statistics. The story of orphans as lost causes. The story of the forgotten and the abandoned, destined to fail. We had taken that story and rewritten it. With dirt and seeds and sweat and love. We were no longer just Emmett and Willa, the kids from the system. We were the owners of Lorraine's garden. We were growers. We were survivors. We were home. And in the end, that's what inheritance really means. It's not about the property or the money or the things you're left. It's about the story you're given, the values, the struggles, the stubborn hope that gets passed down from one generation to the next. Our grandmother didn't leave us a solution. She left us a problem. She left us a choice. She left us a chance to become the kind of people who could solve it. That was the greatest gift of all. She gave us the chance to save ourselves.